everybody.
Welcome to Lady Vibe,
Your podcast for.
better well-being.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to Lady Vibe,
Your podcast for.
better well-being.
Welcome to our new episode. Thank you for tuning in or watching. On our Facebook page, we received a comment from an audience who just finished her chemotherapy for breast cancer. She is curious to know what she can do to prevent the cancer from coming back again. We know how dramatic it is to hear the news about having cancer, and for all survivors, they want to know what they can do to prevent it from coming back again. So to address her question, I think there is no better candidate than Dr. William J. McCarthy from UCLA, who has spent his whole career doing interventional studies to figure out what works to reduce risk of cancer and chronic diseases. Dr. McCarthy is a full professor at the Center for Cancer Prevention and Control Research and also UCLA Kaiser Permanente Center for Health Equity. We are so thrilled to have him come to our studio today. Dr. McCarthy, I would like you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Ning and Rachel, for your kind invitation to be on your podcast. I'm delighted to share what I know about behavioral strategies to minimize risk of cancer and other diseases. And there is no magic bullet, but there are practical steps that people can take that will make a significant change in their risk if they adhere to recommended lifestyle choices. The American Institute for Cancer Research says limit processed meat, limit sweetened sugar, limit alcohol, limit fast food intake. All of these are pro-inflammatory. So the benefits, the anti-inflammatory benefits of feeding the kind of foods that the microbes love will be undermined by these other choices. So it's not just a matter of eating the foods good for the microbes, it's also a matter of limiting the kinds of foods that are going to undermine the anti-inflammatory effects of eating a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, and fruits.
How do we do that? So how do we limit? What are those foods that increase the inflammatory response? I mean, obviously processed foods, but are there any specific, like, everybody eats this and it's terrible for them?
So Americans, 60% on average, 60% of their food choices are highly processed. So they're relying on foods of convenience. And so we're trying now to invite people to be inconvenient, to instead of relying on foods ready to eat, right out of the bottle, right out of the package, instead to be doing more home cooking. So avoiding restaurants or limiting restaurants is a good strategy. And we don't have an answer for the globe-trotting salesman who is totally dependent on restaurants. We just acknowledge that being a globe-trotting salesperson who's dependent on restaurants, they're sacrificing their health in order to boost, personal income. So we all have to make our choices, but it seems to us that many Americans, in as much as they value a long life, they value a disease-free life, should be willing to incorporate a little more inconvenience in order to have longer-term outcomes that they will enjoy. And so that's why we say, try to limit your intake of red meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, alcohol, and fast foods.
Very good. That's helpful. I actually have done almost 30 whole days of no alcohol and 30-minute workouts a day. And I can tell you I feel significantly better because, my sugar intake has gone down quite a bit. And I have actually had quite a bit more time to make food at home. Are there any specific, we call them superfood dishes that encompass those omegas and encompass those whole grains? Sounds quite a bit like the Mediterranean diet, but are there other, we'll call it you should eat that foods?
Uh, yes. If we look back at our ancestors, no matter where they were on the globe, whether they were in Africa, Europe, uh, in the New World, in North America, South America, we find that a common denominator was stew or soup. And so a superfood I would recommend is for everybody to have soup, ideally once a day,
I love it.
because not, for our forebears, part of the benefit of having soup each day was that it provided a pathogenic microbe-free source of liquid, because wherever they lived, they contaminated these streams, and so it wasn't safe to drink the water. But you could drink the soup, because the soup, through the heating process that soup is exposed to, would kill the pathogenic microbes. But more than that, they also didn't have refrigerators. And so a lot of their vegetable choices that they would scrounge around, they'd pick the fruit from the jungle or whatever, and vegetables from the ground. A lot of that would begin spoiling. And by exposing them to heat, our the consumers of the soup could recycle some of the foods that were spoiling. And so it was a way of maximizing the calorie benefits of having a steady access to fruits and vegetables, and at the same time, protect them from pathogenic bacteria.
So in terms of soup, my main concern is that when you cook it like that, like will that damage some of the antioxidants in the food, in the
Yes.
vegetables?
Yeah. So the pathogens, I mean, we talked about the polyphenols. The polyphenols are very sensitive to heat. And this is part of my problem with canned foods. So most canned foods are heated to a very high temperature in order to reduce the risk of botulism. And by canning a food, you're ending up sacrificing most of the polyphenols that would otherwise be good substrates for, the microbes. So the home-cooked soup is less exposed to heat than a lot of the foods in the cans.
Sure.
So yes, you will sacrifice some polyphenols, but if you have a rich variety of polyphenol-rich foods, you're still going to get more than if you're reliant on the processed soups that you get in cans.
Right. So I guess, in Asian culture, when we cook soup, we don't add heavy whipped cream or a lot of butter, a lot of those fatty stuff. So I guess like a lot of the Western soup, style soup, are not actually good for you either, right?
Yeah. So what I've said earlier about avoiding saturated fat applies to soups as well. So yes. So don't go for a chowder which has cream in it, but
Yeah.
instead go to a broth-based or even a poultry-based broth, um, and where you try to minimize the use of butter or cream.
Yeah. And you can be so creative with soups.
Exactly.
Add whatever
And
protein you want as well in there.
yeah, so places like Mexico and Africa, they have all these different herbs, and these herbs have different flavors. And so you can take the same soup and have a different flavor on different days. And so you have the sense of a variety, even though the base is very common. And at the same time, herbs are very rich in the polyphenols that the microbes love. So that's part of the reason why I am very enthusiastic about people having soup, because you can throw in a melange of vegetables and different herbs and vary it from one day to the next, and you never get tired of it. and it's very rich in polyphenols and fiber.
There's a woman close to where we live. We kind of live out closer towards the country, and she'll make homemade soup, and she'll add like at least 15 different types of vegetables. And it is so good. I would eat it every single day. It's so good.
That's great. Hey,
Yeah.
I have a question about herbs. Bill, you mentioned like different types of herbs. There are a lot of statements out there how herbs can be, um, helpful for preventing cancer or inflammation. There's even like turmeric, uh, pills, supplements. So, what kind of herbs are more are richer in antioxidants or more helpful?
Um, I spoke earlier about the importance of diversity, and it's turning out that it doesn't matter, which herbs you might think are, particularly important. The variety is going to give you more benefit in terms of giving the microbes what they need. Remember, there are 1,000 different microbial species, each one of which has a different nutritional niche. So I would tell people much more important to make sure you have a different herb on a different day over the course of a week, rather than trying to find the herb that is going to maximize your polyphenol intake.
When this diagram, just to break it down, so it says 6 HMAFs, so highly microbiota accessible foods that are not processed, that are free or relatively free of saturated fat, sugar, added salt, emulsifiers, and not canned. So that sounds like, to your point, homemade soup, 30 minutes of huff and puff exercise, ideally 5 or more days a week, and then these probiotics. So I know we talked a bit about this earlier, but just for the audience, what fruits or whole foods are the most rich in probiotics that can be taken outside of, we'll call them the probiotic shots or pills.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, entrepreneurial interest in creating uh, probiotic pills as supplements. And, that may be helpful, but the science, doesn't have a lot of consensus on that. But what we do have consensus on epidemiologically is that fermented foods like sauerkraut, like kimchi, like kefir, like yogurt, that these foods are naturally rich in microbes that are helpful to us, otherwise known as probiotics. And when we look at the Japanese, a lot of their foods are fermented. Um, so that's also part of their longevity superiority over Americans, that they're eating a lot more fermented foods than we are. So yes, probiotics clearly show some promise, but if you want to go with what the evidence is clearly supportive of, go for the natural foods that historically have been used, as fermented foods, rather than trying to rely on commercial probiotics where we just don't know what the
Yeah.
long-term effects of those supplements might be.
So I've heard pickles, I've heard kimchi. Are there any other fermented pickled beets? What are the best ones that are, we'll call them relatively accessible from like a place like Sprouts or Whole Foods or the grocery store? Are there any others you've heard of that can help?
So the most common source of fermented foods for Americans probably is yogurt. But the problem with commercial yogurts is that typically they have sugar added to them, and the sugar is going to undermine some of the health benefits of the probiotics. So, where possible, get a plain yogurt, and then if you want flavor, add fresh fruit on top of it, rather than relying on the manufacturer to give you the fruit. Because in my experience, almost all of the fruit flavored yogurts have added sugar.
Sure.
I also like adding a little bit of honey to just give it a taste.
Yeah, honey. Uh, People think of this as honey is a natural sugar. No, it's not. It's a processed sugar. It's processed by bees.
It's not good.
So the fact that it's not processed by humans does not make it natural. It's still a processed food. So from a glucose control point of view, you should treat honey pretty much the same as added sugar.
Wow.
And then just, yeah, one last question. This diagram says, you know, your healthy gut microbiota and your GLP-1s will go up. So just to clarify the distinction on, there's so much talk about, what Wegovy is a GLP-1. So can you distinctly call out the sort of human anatomic GLP-1 levels as opposed to, we'll call it the increase in GLP-1s from the medicines, just sort of in layman's terms what the translation is, as opposed to essentially you can have this, it sounds like you're saying you can have this GLP-1 increase from minimally processed food, exercise, and probiotics. And that's a better way to go than taking drugs. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. So it's pretty clear that Americans are not eating enough fiber, both in terms of quantity and in terms of diversity. They're eating only half of what's recommended by the dietary guidelines for Americans. And what we find by adopting this kind of diet is that you get a doubling of your GLP-1. But the doubling is just a fraction of what you get with these drugs. These drugs give you super physiological amounts of GLP-1. So you're getting 10 times the amount of GLP-1 using these drugs as Americans have natively by eating the standard American diet. So the good news is that when you do it natively through your food choices, even though you only get a doubling and still 1/5 of what you get from the drugs, you don't get the side effects that you get with the drugs. With the drugs, most people getting on these drugs experience some kind of nausea. And, at least 10% say, forget the drugs. There's just too much nausea. But there are other more serious side effects of using the drugs as opposed to using Mother Nature to get your increased GLP-1. And those include gastroparesis, which is a medical emergency. When you've got paralysis of your stomach, something has to happen quickly, otherwise you're going to die. Uh, so if you go with Mother Nature, you'll end up with a level of GLP-1 that naturally prevents you from overeating. So it's not a quick way to lose weight. It takes longer with this Mother Nature way, but your quality of life will end up being happier and you will feel ultimately more empowered because you did it through just natural means, through your food choices and through your exercise, that you don't get when you're relying on a drug, where as soon as you stop the drug, the weight comes back.
Exactly. And the long-term safety and effectiveness are still yet to be determined, right? For the GLP-1
That's right.
inhibitor
So we've
drugs.
only been studying them for weight loss purposes anyway for the last 3 years. So we need a lot more data to know what the long-term effects are.
So, yeah, if you can do it naturally, try to avoid the medications for now, right? So, Bill, thank you so much for sharing the science behind all the things that we hear every day in the news. Um, I guess it's definitely less convenient to cook to get wholesome ingredients and cook on your own than getting the canned or prepared food, but it will definitely worth it. I often hear people say, "What's the I want to have the pleasure of eating whatever I want. I don't need to live that long, right?" But it to me, it's not just about living longer. It's also about better quality of life, because once you get those heart disease, you get diabetes, your quality of life will be dramatically decreased.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much. for coming to our studio to share your valuable insights. We look forward to hearing the results of that interventional study among breast cancer patients.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I look forward to diversifying my microbiota over the next week and getting my huff and puff exercise. So thank you for
All
those
right.
tips. I think it'll help
Oh,
a lot
you're
of
welcome.
people. We
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Thank you,
Yeah, I
Ning.
need to
Thank you,
go
Rachel.
go through my pantry and throw away a lot of stuff. I think that's what I need to do today. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I will say everybody have a great rest of the day, and as they say, it's Lady Vibe Tuesday. So go have a great day.
All right.
Have a
Take
fantastic
care.
day.